this screen. Happy Monday, everybody. My name is Jake Tonkel. I'm a candidate for San Jose City Council here in District 6. And tonight we're talking affordable housing with Sandy Perry, a longtime housing advocate and advocate for our unhoused. Thank you for coming, Sandy. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me here. I'm very excited about your campaign.
Thank you.
We need a change.
We certainly need a change. We did before COVID, and now I think we're really seeing just how drastic the situation really was for our community and who was at risk. I know there's been a couple of reports that are starting to come out and be cited. We're looking at over 40,000 families, I believe. Is that right? That's might correct. Face eviction when the eviction moratorium ends. And I was hoping you could speak a little to that.
I've been involved. I've been in San Jose for about 30 years now. Me and my wife, and our daughter, we moved here in 1990, and ever since I came here, I've been involved in the issues of affordable housing and homelessness. I was raised as a Quaker, so I've always had these inclinations toward social justice, and so I have been involved during all that time. And you're absolutely right. The pandemic is just exposing an underlying problem that we've had all along, and in fact has gotten worse. A lot of people don't understand the housing crisis. A lot of people think it's an act of God, or that it's an accident, or that it's something nobody can do anything about. And certainly a lot of our city council leaders right now would have you believe that. But the housing crisis in San Jose is actually a plan. If you look at the general plan, which they're talking about revising right now, the general plan is to add 382,000 jobs, but only 120,000 housing units. And there's some complicated math involved in that. But what that means is they're planning to get rid of 400,000 people that live in San Jose now. There's no room for them. They're not going to have enough housing for those people. Those people are going to be replaced by all the new people coming in to work at those new tech jobs primarily. So, and this is certainly what's going to happen with Google. Since Google announced they were coming to San Jose, the numbers of homelessness in San Jose increased by 42%. And so the pandemic is that was what the situation was before the pandemic came. Now that the pandemic came, as you said, 43,000 families are at risk of eviction due to the failure by our current city council, the Board of Supervisors, the state of California, and most recently by the federal government. The federal government failed to come to any agreement on rent relief. And instead, Trump put out a phony eviction moratorium extension, which didn't even extend the existing moratorium. It just said, I care about evictions. That's all it was. It was a statement that says, I care about evictions, but it did absolutely nothing to prevent evictions. And so we're going to the Board of Supervisors tomorrow. They're considering extension of the moratorium, and we definitely support extending the moratorium because it's saving lives right now. It's preventing people from getting homeless. And when you are homeless, there's unfortunately, there's 7,000 people out there in our streets in the county right now who, even in the middle of the pandemic, are living with no running water, no toilets. There's a few places around where the city has provided some porta potties and washing stations, but they're very inadequate. So it's extremely dangerous out there on the streets. And to even think about sending 43,000 families out there to add to the 7,000 we already have there it's just unthinkable. So we'll be asking the supervisors to extend the moratorium and to continue to find an answer to this problem of canceling the back rent, because when the main issue with those 43,000 people at risk is when they get back to work, they should, most of them, be able to pay their current rent, but the back rent, they won't be able to. And if they can be evicted for failure to pay back rent, this whole situation, this desperate situation, will get a lot more desperate. So sorry for such a long answer to a short question.
No, it's needed. I mean, the challenge that we are faced with is really, do we put people and families first, or are we going to continue to run the way the status quo has people say is appropriate action to take? And we're at a crossroads as a city, as a county, as a country, on that very decision. We have been for a long time, in all honesty, but this is really speeding up that timeline. I mean, most families, like you said, when they had their jobs, were barely making ends meet. And choosing between rent and food and internet, etc. And so if that same job comes back, there is no way you save up 10, so, if we're in this 5, 6 more months, 15, 20, $30,000 in back rent that you might be paying through the end of this, we're in a really tough spot. I know you're looking at the county on Tuesday. The city of San Jose, to my understanding, I have not heard is looking at extending the moratorium yet either. In that front, everyone that's watching or listening, please reach out to your city council representative, reach out to your board of supervisors member, and make this ask. I am fortunate enough where our team has shifted a lot, and we are calling renters in District 6, making sure they're aware of the eviction moratorium, the changes that are coming. And I talked to a young woman and her partner just on Friday that still didn't know, even though they had lost wages, that they needed to file a form in order to be safe from eviction because of COVID rent relief, right? Yeah. There's that challenge in communication, and so I want to hear from you. What are you doing? What are some of the organizations that you've seen do a good job reach into the community and bring awareness around what their rights are during the COVID pandemic and how they can protect themselves?
Well, there's a lot of organizations that are out there that are working. Actually, the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley has developed a little card. Unfortunately, I don't have it right here with me. It's a business card size, and it's kind of very similar to the Know Your Rights card that were distributed in the immigrant communities. And one side is, these are your rights, and the other side is a notice to your landlord, which serves the purpose of that notice to your landlord. So you can actually take the same card, read your rights, and then give the card to the landlord, and that would serve as your notice. You also have to provide some proof, any kind of proof of loss of income. Doesn't have to be how much. It could be a wage deduction, reduced hours, unemployment, filing for unemployment, or any of those things. And landlords are having a really hard time with these things. They're going around to tenants and giving them bills. I met a tenant the other day who had a bill from her landlord of $12,000. That was the back rent that she owed, and she can't pay it. So that's the issue. We're going to bring it back to the supervisors tomorrow. City council needs to grapple with it. Also, we actually took an issue to the city council. I think it was back during the beginning of the pandemic in April or something, asking them to cancel rent, and they flatly refused. They said it was the city attorney advised them against it, even though we had good legal arguments and legal briefs pointing out that it was permissible under the Constitution. But at any rate, they turned us down. But I mean, it's just a sign of how broken our system is and how our system is oriented toward treating housing as an investment instead of treating it as a place. Human beings, we invented housing several thousand years ago. And the purpose of it is to keep rain off your head, keep snow out, provide shade, and also security against wild animals or bad people or whatever. Housing serves a basic human need. And it wasn't invented so somebody could make more money off of it. It was invented to protect people. And when you have a situation where people are making money off of housing and people are getting evicted and ending up living out in the streets, then that means the whole system is broken down. It's not working anymore. And so I've worked with alternative visions of housing. There's a thing called the Green New Deal for housing that was written up by some professor from back east. But the idea is, and Bernie had some similar stuff in his campaign where he said we need to build 10 million units of housing to really address the housing shortage in America. And the Green New Deal for housing talks about 10 million housing units that are specifically what's called social housing or public housing, mixed income public housing, because a lot of people have a bad conception of public housing because in the United States, it's only been permitted for people that were the poorest at the very lowest economic rung. And also it was historically deliberately segregated. So
and then unfunded, essentially.
And unfunded, yeah. So there have been problems with public housing in the United States because it wasn't done right. And you can go to Vienna or some other countries where it's done right. Actually, Singapore has one of the best public housing systems in the world, where you have all different income levels. And what happens is the people at the higher income levels effectively subsidize the people at the lower income level. So it doesn't even cost the government anything. So anyway, there's a lot of visionary proposals out there, but basically they have to do what's called with decommodifying housing, which is to take the profit motive out of housing and have housing be a human need, a human right that's available to the community. And we're actually working on a community land trust in San Jose. Actually, there's several groups working on them. And that's the idea behind a community land trust, is to decommodify housing, have it be something which is permanently affordable, a human right, and something which is controlled by the community. The community actually manages the housing.
Yes, I mean, that's the distinct difference, right, between, you know, setting aside for public housing and then community land trusts more cooperatively owned, right? The community, buys into this land area. It's, run by nonprofit organization or community organization rather than the city as well. So you have, in my mind anyway, both of those options as levers to be pulled so that we can start to decommodify that market and find a balance that works right for us. Because I mean, we are a major city, and while, like you said, the general plan, it tries to bring us into a job center where there are more jobs than housing. And I think all can agree that at the end of the day, to build a safe, healthy community for everybody, you want to live close to where you work. You want to know your neighbors. You want your commute to be shorter. You want your community to be diverse, right? I think that's a huge piece of it with, the change in income levels among our housing structure. You want to have, wealthy people right by side with, more working class families, because you get that diversity that is, the city of San Jose, and it's healthier for everybody.
Right. Now, we try to, as advocates, what I've tried to do in the various groups that I work with, we try to walk a line between being visionary and thinking about the future and big picture, and also at the same time dealing with the political issues which are coming up in front of our faces right here in San Jose. For the last 5 years, we've been in a huge rent control battle in San Jose, which we don't feel like we've won. We think San Jose needs stricter rent control, lower rent increases being allowed, and stronger eviction protections. There's also coming up on August 25th, there's a city council is going to vote on a commercial linkage fee, which is a very important, again, understanding that the city's a mess, there still are some incremental improvements which can be made. So we're working on the commercial linkage fee, which could produce up to 5,000 affordable housing units, which is actually what's needed to offset just the Google development, those 5,000 units. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other developments that are also in the pipeline right now. So we're going to continue getting behind, but even so, I still advocate we should. These are defensive battles, so it'll help things get worse a little slower, while at the same time we work on some of these more visionary solutions. There's also an anti-displacement plan, which is coming to City Council supposedly September 1st, if it gets there on schedule. And there's some good policies in there, like a Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which actually would be very helpful for a community land trust. And it says when a landlord goes to sell his property, that the tenants actually have the first right of refusal. And they can also designate, if they're not equipped to actually buy it, they can designate a nonprofit organization to buy it. So there's some good things that are coming up. We need a complete change, which these things won't do, but they will make incremental improvements. So, and that's part of our strategy really, is to work with people on the incremental improvements and try to educate the community on a long range strategy. Social transformation.
We'll get there. I mean, for those of you that hadn't heard about the commercial linkage fee, I wanted to explain it really quick. It's the idea that we have homes being built in the city of San Jose, housing units, and then we have commercial space for businesses, etc. When businesses come in and buy up property and create a new development, that still has an impact on the housing prices, the rental prices in the area, and will impact the people that are living there, potentially driving them out and raising rents in that space. So this commercial linkage fee is really an offset of that negative externality, that negative consequence of this commercial space, so that the community is made whole afterwards. As Sandy said, it's not necessarily an offensive move for those of us that are really advocating for housing for everyone in our city, but it is a way where we get back some of the loss and have the opportunity to move forward and mitigate that impact a little bit. I think, again, there are a lot of small things that come up week after week at City Hall, or sometimes a month or two apart. It's hard to be aware of everything that's going on. It's where awesome people like Sandy come in and rally the troops so that we can send emails, make phone calls, have your voice heard at City Hall and through your council district as well. So again, there's a lot of work to be done, some creative ideas out there on how to move forward. But in all honesty, a little bit of a very bleak outlook right now for many of our renters and families in San Jose.
Yeah, it's a bleak outlook short term. I'm a person of faith, so I like to look on the positive side of things, but it is going to be very rough. And even if you have this eviction crisis, because they're talking about the figures I heard today were even 30 to 40 million families possibly subject to eviction at the national level. And that's important, not just because of the human suffering that could cause, but also think about it. That could impact our election. When you lose your place to stay, maybe that's one reason the government hasn't extended the eviction moratorium, why they aren't protecting people, why they refusing to provide election relief, because maybe there's cynical people up there in Washington, D.C. If they get evicted, they'll lose their voter registration, they won't vote, and maybe we can have a president who wins with a very small, only getting votes from a very small part of the population again. So it's dark times, but as they say, it's also the social movement that we've seen over the last couple of months gives me lots of hope. And I think it's up to us to let people know that, if you can't pay your rent during a pandemic, it's not a personal problem. It's not your personal shortcoming. It's a systemic problem, and we need to transform the way we look at it from being just our personal problem into a movement for social change and for exoneration or cancellation of those rents, so that people can go on living as they lived before, and hopefully living a better life than they lived before the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think it's so important we highlight the intersection of housing not engage in our electoral process, engage in our democracy. If you're on the verge of eviction, you're going to have a hard time getting down to city hall. You're going to have a hard time making ends meet for yourself, for your children. You're going to have a hard time helping them with their schoolwork. And there is so much stress, mental anxiety, mental health issues that come with being in a space where you don't feel safe in your own home. You don't know what the outcome of your next few weeks or next few months are. Those all have huge long-term implications for our community too. Not only is it incredibly expensive for us as a city and a landlord and a tenant to go through this process of eviction just so that we can move someone out and bring someone else in who is more well off and likely to pay rent. But we're at a spot where there is just going to be so many community issues that are impacted by housing. And it's very clear if you don't want to solve those community issues, you definitely don't want to solve housing, and vice versa. Solving housing solves some of the big structural issues with solving some of those more complex and more nuanced issues in our community.
Certainly, housing solves the issue of transportation, because with these, of course, it's changed a little with the pandemic, but we did have this situation with all these gridlock freeways. And if we had affordable housing for the people that work here, we wouldn't have these gridlock every morning and every afternoon going in and out of Silicon Valley. So and that's in terms of quality of life. It's one thing for people to be stressed about paying the rent, or working 2 or 3 jobs to be able to pay the rent, or to actually become homeless and try to survive living in an RV or something. Or there's probably the biggest number of all of the people impacted by the housing crisis are people who actually had to move 2 hours outside the city and commute to their job every day. 2 hours one way, 2 hours the other way. And just think for a minute what that would do to your family life, to your children, the education of your children. It's not a good situation. And to me, it's unthinkable that we have a city council which tolerates that situation and continues to allow it, and actually is planning to make it worse, actively planning to make the housing crisis worse. Why would they do that? Well, there's a lot of people making a lot of money off the situation the way it is right now. Tech companies, real estate companies, landlords, but in terms of representing the people, no, does not represent the people of San Jose.
Yeah, you see that in campaign finance. I mean, go dig into anyone running for San Jose City Council, dig into their public records, see who was donating to the campaign. Was it reflective of our community, or was it very heavy on real estate and development money? That's a huge problem that we have to continue to figure out new ways to solve. It's why, my campaign, we're refusing money from corporations and developers. I think that's somewhat of the way that we see that influence happen. We're also, talking about a job where, in all honesty to everybody watching, if the city of San Jose has tons of money, it would make my job super easy. You say, oh yeah, sure you want this, sure you want that, go ahead, you can make everybody happy. And so the way to make your job easier is then to go for these commercial developments, to go for these big luxury housing units, because the city well, the reason that we're trying to push a jobs to housing ratio to be more job heavy is because the city gets more tax dollars and spends less money because there are less people in homes that you have to provide constituent services for. It's a simple mathematical calculation that everyone is making to make the job easier at City Hall. And rather than create a community that's reflective of the entire community, we're looking at City of San Jose having one low-income housing unit for every 4 low-income jobs, which means 3 out of every 4 people working these jobs are commuting from outside San Jose or jam-packed into somewhere that's overcrowded and unsafe. It does not reflect the kind of community I want anyway. I don't think it reflects the kind of community any of us want in the city, but there is a stronghold on the way that policy interacts right now, and it's something we have to change. We do have one question that I will bring up. Anthony Beckers is asked Sandy how corporations like Apple and Google need to invest more in workforce housing and affordable housing around their development sites, and how these and how so many people working at these tech companies make just over the minimum wage or at the minimum wage.
Well, I think you've actually stated the problem. I don't have too much to add to that. The big problem with the tech companies, and this is true of Apple, Google, and Facebook, is that they're tax dodgers. They pay a tiny portion of their money for taxes. I don't know if people remember in 2016 when Trump was elected, he called all the tech CEOs into Washington, D.C. in November after the election in 2016. And I'll have to admit I wasn't there, but a fly on the wall told me what the conversation was. And the conversation was, well, we don't like your wall that much, and we don't really care for that Muslim ban, but give us your tax breaks, give us your tax cuts. And what do you know? They got the big tax cut in 2017. They got tens of billions of dollars. I think Apple, it was over $100 billion in tax cuts. So I don't even care about the tech companies building housing themselves. And Bernie Sanders just laughed at Google and Apple when they said, oh, we're going to give $1 billion for housing. And Apple says we're going to give $2 billion for housing. They've skipped out on hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes, which the government could build that housing if it had the money from these corporations. But they're very ruthless. They spend a lot of time on public relations, particularly Google. When they've been coming into San Jose, they hired all kinds of slick PR people, and but what they're in it for is the money, and they're absolutely ruthless when it comes to making money, and they don't pay taxes. And it's up to I don't even blame them so much as I blame our political leaders for not holding them accountable, both Democrats and Republicans. They just have not taxed them at the rate which they deserve, and that money could house our people. And
yeah, I mean, to your point about PR, right? $1 billion does not get us very many units. I mean, part of Google's PR plan to come in was, here's $1 billion for the whole Bay Area. And it provides us, we're looking at $500,000 per unit of housing in terms of cost. So $1 billion does not get us that many units when we're talking about 7,000 people or 7 million people in the whole Bay Area. We really need to stand together. It's why I'm so excited that we have so many amazing candidates running at Santa Clara, Anthony. We have people up in Sunnyvale, Mountain View, so many folks that realize for us to make sure that our community is taken care of, our local governments need to work together to say, hey, this is the bare minimum. You're not going to pit us against each other and say, well, I'll build in Cupertino instead of Sunnyvale unless you give me billions in tax breaks. It's really important that we as a community know that our direction, our health and safety moving forward is intertwined with that community itself. sticking together and talking about the things that we need to be healthy and live, fulfilling lives. So, Sandy, thank you so much. We're at 7 o'clock. I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on.
Thank you. Thank you. We need more people like you running for office. We need idealistic people running for office. We've had enough of these jaded deal makers and backslappers and whatever they call themselves. We need people with real values and real ideals. So I'm just more than glad to support you. And like as you said, there's other people out there. Let me give a shout out to Tiffany Vong. She just qualified for the ballot in Milpitas. She is an awesome young candidate who's going to turn that city upside down. So people pay attention to her and vote for her if you live in Milpitas.
Yeah, on that note, lots of amazing people up and down, whether it's city council, school board, county board of education. We've got a lot of work to do, but a very inspiring 2020 election season, a very inspiring social justice movement coming out of COVID and Black Lives Matter. We will make the change we need to see in our communities, but we're only going to do it when we're in this together. So I appreciate the support, Sandy, and looking forward to continuing to learn from you and make the change that's needed in San Jose. So,
amen. Thank you, Jay. Thanks for allowing me to talk.
Yeah, of course.